Tonight on Frontline, prisoners of silence. These children cannot speak. No one knows what's going on inside their heads. They're autistic. Frontline investigates facilitated communication, the theory, the practice, and the controversy.
My God, it's really true. This stuff is bogus. It was just so clear. It was so unmistakable. I was sitting there watching this.
What's 6 times 2?
Every American child knows this song. They can feel happy, and they know what it is like to feel happy. But to children growing up with the strange condition of autism, like these at the Boston Higashi School, the words may not mean much at all. Something has gone wrong with their developing brains. The children have a faraway look. Generally, they shun human contact. The mysterious condition of autism affects close to 400,000 Americans. Most have little or no speech. While the condition can be treated, there's no cure.
Any two numbers multiplied by?
Until 3 years ago, this was the generally accepted theory of autism. But then a radical and controversial new technique called facilitated communication, Jeff Powell, once written off as profoundly autistic, sits in class doing algebra.
Okay, foil.
Profoundly autistic Ben Lair can't speak, but can type his thoughts to an audience of people.
Feel like you need patient friends like Mike. They fight for me.
Professor Douglas Biklen of Syracuse University thinks it the most important breakthrough in autism ever and is promoting it enthusiastically. The theory of facilitated communication claims that many, perhaps most autistic people are not, but have intelligent minds imprisoned in bad bodies.
R, either for. Good. Go ahead. Delete. Did you want to delete that?
Biklen argues that autistic individuals, like Ellen, have many things to say, but are unable to say them because her body will not do what her mind wants. But with a little help, or facilitation, holding her hand, wrist, or elbow, her body's often jerky movements can be smoothed out, allowing her to type letters on a keyboard.
Talk. I. N. G.
When Douglas Biklen discovered the method during a visit to Melbourne, Australia, he realized that everything known about autism might be wrong.
I knew that I had seen something terribly important. Here was a means of expression for people who lacked expression. Here was a way that you could find out what people were feeling and what they were thinking. And, you know, these were people who had a disability, the very definition of which suggested that the people might not have feelings, and certainly no ability to empathize with other people's feelings. This was a disability, the very definition of which was that people lacked imaginative ability. Well, you know, how do you do higher order mathematics without an imagination? How do you write poetry without an imagination? So it was quite clear that this was a means of expression that was revolutionary.
The O.D. Heck Center for the Developmentally Disabled in Schenectady, New York, runs a large autism program.
Stuart, how are you doing with us?
Before facilitated communication, the staff never imagined that any of their nonverbal clients might be of normal intelligence. But then speech pathologist Marion Pitsis heard about the new technique being promoted at Syracuse University. Together with her colleague Jimmy Maruska, she went to find out how it worked.
Very good. What's inside? What are you going to get?
3 of us went for the training first, and we rapidly trained everyone in our program, all 3 shifts, and had many, many clients typing at varying levels and with varying degrees of success, but it spread very, very quickly. I thought it was wonderful. At last, we were going to we were going to help these people communicate. We would find out what they really understood.
What's going on? Before, they were just another person that I was helping with and teaching them some basic skills to help them survive out there. But here along comes a person that can share their thoughts, that can talk to me, I can talk to them, we can have a conversation that's relevant. It was great. It was really super. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more. All of a sudden, these people that we always treated as low functioning were right up there with us.
Ray Pagliari, the director of the autism program, realized the enormous implications of the typed messages his clients were now producing.
I was thinking that certainly a large number, if not all of the folks that we were working with, may in fact have normal intelligence.
Very nice.
I mean, we had people typing sentences, paragraphs, the like. We were thinking we were going to redefine the whole notion of what autism is all about. We trained the rest of our staff. Okay, we literally were encouraging people to work with everybody in the program. We were training as many people as we could, training people out in the community. And we were excited. We looked at it as literally a breakthrough technique.
So did the media.
Prime Time, now from New York, Diane Sawyer.
And now a story about hope. For decades, autism has been a dark mystery, a disorder that seems to turn children in on themselves, against the world. Tonight, however, you are going to see something that has changed that. Call it a miracle, call it an awakening.
Word of the new miracle of facilitated communication spread rapidly. Parents told teachers, and teachers told parents.
The system that carries matter from one place to another.
Many schools embraced it. At Edward Smith Elementary School in Syracuse, children previously thought to be profoundly autistic now sat in classes with their peers, receiving age-appropriate instruction, studying math, studying biology.
Plasma is correct, PJ. Nice job.
Maybe you can say what you want to point to.
A large group of individuals had, in Biklen's view, been greatly underestimated, simply because they could not speak or control their bodies.
Why don't you show us, and then you try to say it. That's good, because then you work on keeping that. I had always believed that it was important to treat people as competent. Perfect. Even though they didn't give off the signs of it. To me, that was just the humane thing to do. That was the sensitive thing to do.
Okay, I'll give you a high five.
The wonderful thing about facilitated communication is that once a person begins to communicate, you can ask the person, what's going on here? Excellent, you got it right.
The words that emerged from the electronic communicators and letterboards spoke of loneliness, of being trapped in a prison of silence, of slavery, and of freedom. For Biklen, a simple technique had redefined an entire group of disabled people. Jeff Powell, for example, is no longer seen by his teachers and peers as profoundly autistic. He has become a celebrity at Baker High School in Syracuse. They stress he's an academically gifted student who writes poetry for the school yearbook. But some people had their doubts about facilitated communication. Dr. Howard Shane has devoted his life to helping disabled, nonverbal people to communicate. Critics like Shane were amazed at the sophisticated output. Autistic children of 5 and 6 produced perfectly spelled sentences. Where had they learned to read and write? A difficult question had to be faced. Was the typing coming from the autistic individual or from the facilitator?
The outcomes that were being reported were just so far out of line with what anyone had ever found. They're communicating in grammatically complete sentences. They're marking the tense correctly. Their spelling is accurate. They have insights that go far beyond their years.
To parents and professionals, facilitated communication had given hope, where there was none. They flocked to Syracuse by the thousand to learn from Douglas Biklen and his staff at the newly founded FacilitatedCommunication Institute.
Welcome to the 1993 Conference on Facilitated Communication in Syracuse, sponsored by the Facilitated Communication Institute at Syracuse University.
Many parents had longed to know what their silent autistic children were thinking, had longed to have conversations with them. Facilitated communication appeared to be a dream come true.
She had been tested in the past, and they said she had an IQ under 10. And I believed it was a little higher than that, but not much higher. And when I heard about facilitated communication, I said, granted, it might work with some people, but I doubt that, and I'm sure it won't work with her. It was a college student who started it with her, and I watched her twice, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Since then, Charisse has typed 120 poems, 9 short stories. She talks about everything she feels.
This past year, in October '92, a wonderful person came into her life, and she believed in facilitative communication. And she said, "Do you know Stacy can write?" And I cried. I couldn't believe it. I said, no, you're wrong. This is my kid. She's learned 6 signs her whole life. This can't be true. But she kept at it. She said, Kathy, she's telling me this and she's telling me that, and you've got to see it. So one day she came over to the house, and she said, Stacy, I know you're excited after all these years. You must have something you want to tell Mom. And Stacy types out, I love you, Mom.
Speech pathologists, social workers, and teachers felt just as passionately that FC had changed everything.
It's changed the theory of autism alone, and that's pretty significant because what we've known as autism is almost completely different. It's almost like the label or term itself needs to be redefined because there are certain words that are under autism, under the DSM-3. There's this, and this. Well, we find that once we open this world for the kids, they are social now, they are appropriate, they do have language, they do understand.
Lead. And advocates claimed FC didn't just work for autism, but for Down syndrome. By 1993, thousands of parents, teachers, speech pathologists, and care workers had been trained as facilitators, the foot soldiers in a new social movement. But some families had their doubts about the numerical technique, like the Girardis from Pike, New Hampshire, whose 17-year-old son, Matt, is autistic.
It was about 2 years ago when someone mentioned that Dr. Biklen was giving some seminars on this facilitated communication. The speech and language teacher at Matthew's school was there, and she just couldn't wait to get back and start with Matthew.
Matt, who could then only recognize about 50 words, went to school, and his teachers began using FC in the classroom. Almost overnight, his academic work improved dramatically. Kathy Girardi became suspicious of his new academic achievements.
He was taking all kinds of Shakespeare literature, Romeo and Juliet, and he was in algebra class, although he didn't fare that well in algebra, but English, diagramming sentences. The work that he was coming home was absolutely incredible. I mean, getting A's in some of these classes that I know I would have a hard time getting A's in.
What seemed especially odd was that Matt wouldn't facilitate with his mother.
At that point, I was frantically trying to communicate with him at home. You know, I'm saying, gosh, if he's talking to these people, why isn't he talking to his mom? You know, he and I have been best friends, bosom buddies. I mean, I'm his life and he's mine. You know, surely we can be able to communicate. And absolutely got nothing. As a matter of fact, he would take his board and bring it and put it in his bag, put it in his closet and say, finished.
While the Girardis got on with their life, reconciled that FC didn't work, at least for them, Matthew's school continued using it enthusiastically. One day at school, Matthew and his facilitator, special education teacher Susan Rand, had a conversation. But it wasn't about Shakespeare. Later that day, Susan Rand wrote down the conversation and reported it to the authorities.
She handed me a piece of paper, actually 2 pieces of paper, and said, these are the things that he said. And I just scanned through the paper, and I was just in shock of some of the language that was on the paper. And I said, it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And it was at that point she made it very clear to me that this was real. It was real, that they had a warrant from my husband's arrest. And they were going to send Matthew to the hospital for an exam. They were telling me that Matthew may have to go to a home, and a foster home. And I told him, I said, there's no way he's going to go to a foster home. I said, he hasn't been anywhere else except our home. There's no way he's going to go to a foster home. And I was told that I may have no choice in the matter. There may be no choice. And it was at that point that I realized I had no control.
Jerry Girardi, a pharmacist at the Veterans Hospital, was working late that day and knew nothing of this until he arrived home.
I got home about 9:30. I pulled into my driveway, and Kathy came rushing down the driveway and started to talk to me. She immediately told me not to go into the house, that there was a warrant out for my arrest, that allegations were made that I had sexually abused Matthew, and I was not allowed near Matthew, nor was I allowed to go into the house.
Forced out of his home, Jerry Girardi spent the next 6 months living at a friend's house, his family life destroyed because of the letters on the board. Despite the fact that there was no other evidence of abuse, the school, the social services, and the police all believed that the words had come from Matthew. Yet Jerry Girardi protested complete innocence.
I told Kathy, there's got to be something wrong. It has to be happening someplace else. We have to call up the Autism Society in Washington and find out if they had any literature on facilitated communications and allegations of sexual abuse. When she called them up, they immediately sent us materials. And in these materials, it showed it was happening all over the country.
There were cases in California, in Texas, in Georgia, in Indiana, in Oklahoma, in New York. The accused included parents, teachers, care workers. Some, like Jerry Girardi, had been forced to leave home. Some ended up in jail. Some parents had their children taken away. This is what happened last January to a family in southern Maine. Betsy Wheaton, a 17-year-old autistic girl, began using FC at school in 1992. One day, using a letterboard, Betsy and her facilitator wrote that everybody in her family, her father, mother, grandparents, and brother, were sexually abusing her. Betsy and her brother were immediately put in foster care while the case was investigated. The court appointed a local attorney, Phil Worden, as Betsy's legal guardian. Worden realized that this was more difficult than the usual abuse case. Before considering whether the allegations were true, the court had to decide a more fundamental question. Was Betsy the author of the allegations, or had they come from her facilitator?
I was most worried in my heart about were we going to do justice in this case. If the communications were real and she was being abused, the idea that on a legal technicality we might send the children back would be just absolutely horrible. On the other hand, if these were not real communications, the idea that all this would happen to these family and these children on a bogus idea was also unacceptable. So to my mind, the stakes were extremely high on both sides, and it was very important that we reach a quality decision based on the truth. And so what I was looking for was a clean, simple, and fairly quick way to just solve that one narrow question. Were these communications coming from the children?
All the parties agreed to invite an expert in communication to come and assess Betsy. 'It They chose Dr. Howard Shane from the Boston Children's Hospital.
Okay, folks, what I'm going to be doing now...
Shane had devised a double-blind test like this to objectively determine who was authoring the messages, Betsy or the facilitator who transcribed the allegations. He showed both a series of pictures and asked them to type what they saw.
Betsy, you sure you're looking at it?
When both Betsy and her facilitators saw a picture of a key, the letters K-E-Y were typed. But Shane wanted to discover what happened if each saw a different picture.
Okay.
When Betsy saw a cup, she didn't type cup, she typed hat, what the facilitator saw.
Here we go. Now take a look at this one. I want you to tell me what you see. Okay?
When Betsy was shown a picture of a dog, she didn't type dog, but sneakers, what the facilitator saw.
Okay. Okay. Want to take a look at that one?
When Betsy was shown a boat,
Now
she didn't
Betsy,
type
you take a
boat,
look at that one.
but sandwich, what the facilitator saw.
Okay, here's the next one.
It was just devastating to watch because what you saw was the words being typed out were the words the facilitator had seen. And it was just so clear and so unmistakable. I was sitting there watching this and saying, my God, it's really true. This stuff is bogus.
What I found was that whenever the pictures were different, I always received the typed message that was seen by the facilitator. So that was pretty strong evidence that not only was Betsy not communicating, but the messages were being absolutely, totally directed and authored by the facilitator. Come on, Betsy.
Shane then tried a message passing test. He took Betsy out into the corridor and showed her an object out of sight of her facilitator.
Come on. Betsy, now I'm going to show you something. Take a look at this. You take this. Now, what is that? Give it back to me. We're going to back in. I want you to tell everybody what I showed you. When we went back into the room, she was unable to type the word key. I then took another key out of my pocket and said, with the facilitator present, what is this? And she immediately typed key. So again, it suggests that when the facilitator is aware of the information, we get the answer. But when the facilitator is unaware of the information, we don't get an answer.
The only logical conclusion of the test was that the terrible accusations had been authored not by Betsy, but by her facilitator. The Wheatons are now reunited. The facilitator, devastated by the test results, stopped using facilitated communication and persuaded Betsy's school to stop using it as well. After using FC for over a year, the OD Heck Center in Schenectady began discussing whether they should do their own test of facilitated communication.
My first reaction was, why would we ever want to test it? It's working. There were things that individuals who typed with me typed that I didn't remember consciously being aware of. So I thought, well, that's proof enough. Why should we need to test these people? It's their communication. All right, find the one that's the same. Let's put it right in front of you. But just in thinking about it, I wanted the research to be done because I thought it would prove once and for all, without a doubt, that it was these people communicating and that we were not influencing them in any way, shape, or form. I was convinced that it would prove their communication.
A team of psychologists and facilitators led by Doug Wheeler devised a rigorous double-blind test.
Well, this is what we had in mind. It's just a simple T device. The table's split down the middle. Myself as a researcher, I can stand back here and I'm pretty much out of view of the
The facilitator and autistic individuals sat side by side with a screen dividing their visual field. Sometimes they were shown the same picture. Sometimes different ones. They tested 12 clients, facilitating with 9 staff members, many who were trained in Syracuse. They ran dozens of trials. The results were shocking.
We literally really didn't get one correct response. I mean, it was unbelievable, really, given our prior belief systems about the whole thing.
We ran 180 trials. there were 180 trials where valid communication could have been demonstrated, and none did. We had overwhelming evidence for facilitator control. That was the main finding.
It's a woman.
And it began to dawn on us that the impact on the facilitators was going to be traumatic. Their belief had grown to such an extent and was continuing to grow at that point where it really had become an essential part of their belief system, an essential part of their personality. And people would use phrases like, FC is my whole life, FC is my life. These people were dedicated. They spent their own money doing training. They spent their own money to buy canned communicators. The dedication was phenomenal. And we had evidence that these people were all controlling the typing, and we knew it was unconscious. We knew these people had no idea they were controlling it. That was clear. So, we began to be very concerned.
It was devastating to see the data just there in black and white in front of you. It was mind-boggling. There was no arguing it. It was clear-cut. To see the look on Doug's face, seated across the table from me, someone who I work with, whose opinion I trust, whose work I trust, I knew you couldn't argue. I couldn't argue with those results. It was devastating to look at it and see it there in black and white in front of me.
It's like taking your best friend and going out and they're getting hit by a car and they're dead. I had the same effect. It's just like going through the death process. I mean, all of a sudden you're slapped with this thing. It's not there. It's a belief. It's something that's ingrained in me. I believe this. I centered a lot of things around this. And now all of a sudden, no, it's not.
Life at OD Heck returned to the way it had been before facilitated communication. The clients learned the life skills they would need to survive outside. No longer were they expected to express their thoughts and wishes in complex sentences.
It was like something had been taken away very, very suddenly, and I didn't know what to replace it with. It took me, I think, months before I could talk about it with some people without breaking down in tears.
There was a bias. It was a bias in terms of proving that it was real. I mean, we selected cards that people experienced in their everyday lessons. We ensured that the individuals participating were paired with the facilitators they had the most success with. We tried to make the setting as natural as it could be. We encouraged people to bring the reinforcers that they use in their normal everyday lives. Turn total control over in terms of, say, to the facilitators. If the person wasn't comfortable that day, they could stop it whenever they wanted to.
More studies came out.
These results suggest that the communications previously reported from individuals with autism may have been influenced by facilitator coactivity.
FC had claimed to unlock expressive literacy in nonverbal autistic individuals. Under controlled scientific conditions, that literacy vanished. To date, over a dozen studies involving hundreds of children and researchers in 3 different countries have reported negative findings, but Biklen remains unconvinced.
A number of these studies have asked people to name objects or name pictures. It turns out that for people with autism and some other developmental disabilities, a number of people experience very severe word-finding problems, such that you ask people to label an object and they can't do it. They may be able to describe the object, even state what it's for, but quite typically they in fact come out with a different name of a different object.
But, researchers asked, was it possible that a child who can write poetry and do algebra would be unable to label a cup? And they questioned why autistic individuals who had appeared on national television and addressed crowds at Syracuse conventions would all be so nervous that none of them would get a single answer right. Despite mounting evidence, most supporters of facilitated communication, especially parents like Marianne Kalin, who wrote this song about FC, were undaunted. They had invested their hopes and dreams in FC and had their own proof that it worked, at least for their children.
I don't need any more validation. My son has given me a lot of information, much of which I didn't know. A lot of it's been about what he wanted, And it's turned out that that's what he did want. He asked even for a trip to Hawaii, and he sat for good as gold on the plane for 5 hours to Hawaii.
FC networks had been established in 38 states. Millions of dollars of public money were being spent providing facilitators in schools and adult centers. Plans were being made for people to take their facilitators to college and even into the workplace. All this had happened without any public debate. From public prosecutors to special educators, from social workers to parents, in their enthusiasm to adopt facilitated communication, they had chosen to overlook a number of things about FC that simply didn't make sense. Skeptics wondered how thousands of autistic people could have taught themselves to read and write just by watching television. And why should disabled individuals who can point by themselves need someone to hold their hands to type?
Regret.
And most significantly, they point out, why is it that most of the time, most of the autistic individuals are not looking at the keyboard? It's certainly true that a touch typist can type without looking at the keyboard. Connie Cesari, star graduate of the Catherine Gibbs School, can type 100 words a minute without looking. She has memorized the layout of the keys. But before starting, she registers her hands in a home position. This is her reference. Frontline wanted to see if she could type with one finger without looking. Despite her intimate knowledge of the keyboard, she can't. Nobody can. Without a reference, it's just impossible.
You can't be a one-fingered typist and not look at the keyboard. You just can't get oriented. You don't have a home position. And when you watch children who are FC facilitated communication users, they may not be looking at the language board.
Look at the board.
But the facilitators are not taking their eyes from it. They're fixed on it.
What's 6 times 2? Good. Okay, space. What's 12 times 12 plus 1? We carried the 1, remember? What's 12 plus 1? Excellent. Give me 5. Okay.
Doug Biklen admits that typing without looking is impossible. So what's going on in the Syracuse schools?
It's not good technique. It's very sloppy, and I think it really raises questions about that particular typing, and as well it should. And what we need to do is to harp on facilitators to monitor eyes. It's a lot for people to manage, but I think we have to do it.
But does the Facilitated Communication Institute practice what it preaches? In the conference last May, Annegret Schubert, arguably the most expert facilitator in the world, gave a seminar on the importance of clients looking at the keyboard.
Are able to work with less support.
Is there anything you want to share with me about it?
Yet minutes afterwards, she was in the corridor talking to a man with his eyes closed and a letterboard moving around in the air. And even when Doug Biklen was present, we filmed Jeff Powell typing while looking at the ceiling, something Biklen concedes is impossible. As Biklen admits, this is a serious matter. If the autistic individuals are not looking, then the facilitators are effectively putting words into their mouths. Scientists in Australia had warned Biklen of such dangers. This videotape especially concerned them. Rosemary Crosley, the founder of FC, is facilitating with a head injury victim in a coma to make a very important decision about where he will live. Because the man is in a coma, his head pointer barely moves throughout the taping. By drawing a line on the screen, it is easy to see that Rosemary Crosley is ever so slowly moving the board.
I don't think they're doing it consciously, but they're absolutely manipulating these individuals, and they're communicating for them. And I don't think that that's acceptable. I don't think that other people have the right to communicate for someone else.
The scientific evidence suggested that far from unlocking the minds of autistic individuals, FC tapped the unconscious thoughts of the facilitator. The process, skeptics say, is not unlike what goes on with a Ouija board. As letters are built up, hypotheses are formed about what comes next. The facilitator who attributes the output to the autistic individual is unaware they are controlling the typing. The autistic individual becomes so sensitized to respond to tiny cues that they become an amplifier for the facilitator's unconscious.
Do you ever have a nightmare that instead of liberating people, FC might end up enslaving them?
Yeah, that worries me. That worries me that people would be in some way, that people are being influenced. There's interpretation of things that, we see that happening, and it troubles me. It troubles me. I think it's terrible.
Did he f*** you in your mouth? No. Did he f*** your toes?
But what explains the high number of facilitated abuse allegations? While most courts have refused to accept FC as genuine communication, earlier this year, a judge in Wichita, Kansas, allowed a nonverbal autistic boy to give testimony through FC.
Did he f*** your butt? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Why the facilitator is making these allegations on behalf of the child, I don't know. Whether they've been abused themselves, I don't have any sense of that. Maybe they've been persuaded. If you look at the literature from Syracuse University, they're suggesting that 10%, make that 13% of the children in their initial study had alleged that they had been sexually abused. Now, if I attended a conference and I was told that 13% of the people in the initial study had been sexually abused, I'd go home and wonder, well, maybe my students are being sexually abused, so maybe the idea is being planted.
Syracuse University is now in the position of having an institute dedicated to researching, teaching, and promoting a technique that all the scientific evidence says is not real. The university even has 7 students doing research theses on facilitated communication. A well-meaning social movement aimed at giving a voice to a group of disabled individuals has developed into a bitter controversy, which some critics have dubbed the cold fusion of human services. They ask why millions of dollars were spent on a technique without first proving it worked. And if unproven, why did thousands of autistic children waste precious years sitting in advanced classes instead of more appropriate education? These are also the questions families like the Girardis are asking. Families whose lives have been turned upside down by FC. After 9 court appearances, social services carried out a controlled test of Matthew, which proved he wasn't capable of authoring the accusations against his father. Last February, the prosecutor dropped the case, and the family was reunited to continue with their lives. The facilitator left the state, but the school continues to believe in FC.
No one has ever apologized. In fact, to this day, we still sense that the administration at the high school will never admit that they were wrong. They want to continue to say that facilitated communication is successful. If a new drug had just been discovered, it wouldn't be something that would be just thrown out into the market. It would take years of studies before this medication would be marketed. It's the same way facilitated communication should be treated. I mean, why should that be thrown out and people's lives devastated because they're trying it out on us guinea pigs. I think a lot of parents are grabbing at straws and are hoping that facilitated communications is going to be the answer for them. And I think they've been blinded by it. And I feel for these people, these parents that believe in it, because I certainly can understand where they're coming from. But until we face it head on and do more scientific investigations of it, then these poor parents out there are gonna be in the dark over what's actually happening to their child.
I know for myself, I wanted so hard to believe that it was real that I wasn't able to listen to objective thinking about it, because it grabs you emotionally right here, and once you're hooked, I mean, you are hooked. I don't think I was capable of rationally thinking about it, because I had clues even before we did our study that there was facilitator influence taking place in other places. People had done studies in Australia, and I said, oh, that doesn't happen here. We aren't using it the same way. We aren't holding letter boards in the air. We have them down on the table. So therefore that limits the influence that could be taking place. Well, I was dead wrong.
It was amazing to me to see how willing people are to abandon their beliefs and adopt a new belief without verification, and do that virtually overnight. Because it happened to myself. And when I think back on it, if I had just thought about the literature on autism and thought about the studies I was familiar with, I would have known that the phenomenon of FC was illogical, that it probably couldn't exist. But I was so caught up in the emotionality of it, and it just taught me a lot about human nature.
Despite everything, Douglas Biklen and the Syracuse Facilitated Communication Institute remain committed to FC. One day, the mysterious condition of autism will be understood, and researchers may find a cure. Until then, as the evidence against facilitated communication accumulates, a painful question remains: whether parents and those who care deeply about autistic individuals are choosing to see them as they would like them to be, rather than respecting them for who they are.